While I showered, my wife kept going through my bag. As a cybersecurity expert, I set a bait card with $57,000. The next day, I saw $48,700 in charges for luxurious hotels and 2 tickets to London with her lover. A week later, she came back bragging, "Love the spa trip." I laugh because of the card she used. Look, I'm not saying I'm psychic or anything, but when you spend 15 years tracking down digital thieves who think they're smarter than the system, you develop what I like to call a radar. It's like a sixth sense, except instead of seeing dead people, I see patterns, numbers that don't add up, stories that sound too rehearsed, smiles that last half a second too long. And let me tell you, that particular Tuesday morning, my radar was going absolutely berserk. I was in the shower humming some completely forgettable tune that had been stuck in my head since the grocery store yesterday. You know how it is. Probably something from a commercial about yogurt or car insurance, when I heard the bathroom door creak open. Now, Chloe and I had been together long enough that bathroom privacy was more of a suggestion than a rule. So I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she needed her hairbrush, maybe she was grabbing her makeup bag, normal married couple stuff, right? Wrong. So incredibly, spectacularly wrong. Through the frosted glass of the shower door, I could see her silhouette, and she wasn't going for the makeup bag. She was crouched down by my gym bag, the beat-up black Nike duffel that I'd been using since college, because honestly, why fix what isn't broken? She was rifling through it, not casually looking for something, rifling like a raccoon going through trash at 3 in the morning, except way more calculated and significantly less cute. I stood there under the hot water, shampoo still in my hair, watching this unfold like a nature documentary. You ever have one of those moments where time kind of slows down and you're watching yourself from outside your own body? Yeah, that part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to slam the shower door open and demand to know what the hell she was doing. But the professional part of me, the part that pays the mortgage, that part whispered, "Shut up, Mark. Watch. Learn." So I did. I watched as she pulled out my wallet, then my passport. Then she paused, holding my passport in both hands like she was weighing it, studying it, memorizing the damn thing. Her face had this expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't panic. It was concentration. Math. Like she was solving an equation in her head, and my identity documents were variables she needed to plug into her formula. I turned off the water, grabbed my towel, and stepped out with the kind of casual energy you'd use if you just caught your dog eating from the trash. You know, that fake, "Oh, hey, what you doing there?" vibe that fools absolutely nobody, but makes everyone pretend everything's fine. "Hey, babe," I said, towel dry in my hair like my entire nervous system wasn't firing off alarm bells. "Lose something?" Chloe looked up, and here's the thing that really got me. She smiled. Not a guilty smile, not an "oops, you caught me" smile, a genuine, warm, "hey, honey" smile that would have won her an Oscar if this were a movie. She held up my passport and said, "Just checking if you still had that hardware store receipt from last week. You know, the one for the shelf brackets. I need to return the wrong size screws." The hardware store receipt in my passport, right? Because that's totally where normal people store receipts for shelf brackets. Not in their wallet, not in the kitchen junk drawer, but sandwiched between pages of an official government document. The logic was so thin I could have used it as a coffee filter. "Oh, yeah," I said, matching her energy with my own Academy Award-worthy performance. "I think I threw that out yesterday, actually. My bad." She shrugged, put my passport back in the bag. Carefully, I noticed exactly where she'd found it, and kissed me on the cheek before leaving the bathroom. "No worries," she said. "I'll just eat the $5. $5? Sure, Chloe, because you've been known to stress over $5 hardware returns. This is the same woman who once spent $70 on a candle because it was artisanal and hand-poured by monks in Vermont, or some equally ridiculous marketing pitch. I stood there in the bathroom, water dripping off my hair onto the tile floor, and I had to consciously choose not to laugh. Not because it was funny, although in a dark, twisted way it kinda was, but because laughing would have meant admitting I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Let me introduce myself properly, since we're apparently going to be spending some time together on this absolute train wreck of a journey. My name is Mark Hale. I'm 38 years old, which means I'm old enough to know better, but apparently not old enough to have learned my lesson about ignoring red flags in relationships. I make a living hunting down electronic thieves, credit card fraudsters, identity theft rings. The kind of people who think they're criminal masterminds, but are really just slightly tech-savvy idiots with expensive taste and no impulse control. I work as a fraud analyst for a private security firm, and before that, I did a stint with the FBI's cybercrimes unit until I realized I could make twice the money in the private sector and not have to deal with government bureaucracy that moves slower than a DMV on a Monday morning. I notice patterns for breakfast. Literally, I wake up, pour my coffee, and my brain starts cataloging data points. That's my job. That's my skill. That's what makes me very, very good at what I do. And that's exactly why this situation with Chloe was so magnificently messed up. Because every single alarm bell in my professional toolkit was clanging like a fire station at rush hour. But here's the kicker. Chloe's face when I walked out of that shower didn't show guilt. It showed calculation. It showed someone who was comfortable with what they were doing, someone who had done it before, someone who had a plan. I got dressed, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table while Chloe hummed in the bedroom getting ready for her day. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 15 years of tracking down thieves, it's this. If you want to catch someone in the act, you don't scare them away. You give them rope. You watch them weave it into a noose. You let them think they're winning. So I planted a seed. Not a literal seed, I'm not suddenly a gardener, but a trap. A beautiful, shiny, irresistible trap. I had a prepaid card in my wallet, one of those reloadable ones that I use for online purchases I don't want attached to my main accounts. I took it out and replaced it with a different card, a bait card, brand new, never used, completely clean. I'd set it up that afternoon. As I sipped my coffee and listened to Chloe's singing in the bedroom, she was in a good mood apparently, I allowed myself one small joke just for my own sanity. If she ever spends my money on a bag I can't pronounce, I muttered to myself, I'll return it and charge her for the dictionary. The mood in the house was light. The sun was coming through the kitchen window. Chloe came out in her favorite sundress, kissed the top of my head, and said something about meeting Jessica for lunch. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. My plan, however, was not normal. My plan was meticulous, surgical, and absolutely ruthless. Because I'd spent 15 years watching people destroy their lives over greed and stupidity, and I'd be damned if I was going to let it happen to me without at least documenting every single step of the process. I smiled at Chloe as she left, waved goodbye like a beautiful husband, and then I sat back down at my laptop and started setting up the most elaborate trap I'd ever built. Not for a stranger, not for some anonymous criminal on the other end of an IP address, for my wife. Here's the thing about living with someone for 7 years. You start to notice the questions. Not the normal, how was your day, or did you remember to buy milk questions. I'm talking about the oddly specific, weirdly timed, suspiciously casual questions that make you wonder if you're having a conversation or being interrogated by someone who watched too many crime documentaries on Netflix. Chloe had always been curious about my work. In the beginning, I thought it was cute. She'd ask about cases I was working on, well, the ones I could actually talk about without violating about 17 different NDAs and possibly committing a federal crime. She'd lean in during dinner, eyes wide, totally captivated when I'd explain how credit card fraud networks operate, how identity thieves build their portfolios, how someone in Romania can empty your bank account while you're sleeping and never leave a digital fingerprint you can actually trace. She loved the detective stuff, the puzzle-solving aspect of it all. She'd nod along like she was taking mental notes, asking follow-up questions that seemed genuinely interested. Except now, looking back with the crystal-clear vision of hindsight and a healthy dose of paranoia, I realized she wasn't just interested. She was studying, learning, doing reconnaissance like a spy preparing for a mission. Except the mission was apparently robbing me blind and living her best life on my dime. The questions have evolved over the years. They'd gotten more technical, more specific, less, wow, that's interesting, and more, okay, but how exactly does that work? About 6 months ago, maybe longer, she'd started asking things like, how fast do banks actually flag suspicious purchases? And what happens when a card gets used overseas? And my personal favorite, do those fraud alerts actually work in real time, or is there a delay? At the time, I'd answered like the trusting idiot I apparently was. I'd explained that most banks have pretty sophisticated algorithms now, that international transactions definitely raise flags, that there's usually a small delay, but nothing major.
Maybe a few minutes to an hour, depending on the system. I'd even walked her through how fraud detection works, like a professor lecturing to an eager student, completely oblivious to the fact that I was basically teaching a master class in how to steal from your husband 101. And then there was Jessica. Oh, Jessica, Chloe's best friend since college. The kind of woman who makes you feel poor just by existing in the same room as her. Jessica, with her perfectly curated Instagram feed, full of luxury vacations to places I can't pronounce, and restaurants where the menu doesn't have prices, because if you have to ask, you clearly don't belong there. Jessica, with her designer handbags that cost more than my car payment, and her casual mentions of just popping over to Paris for the weekend, like normal people pop over to Target for paper towels. Chloe idolized her. I'm not exaggerating. It was full-on worship. She'd scroll through Jessica's Instagram for hours, double-tapping photos of tropical beaches and five-star hotels and champagne brunches, and I'd see this look on her face. Longing, envy, that dangerous kind of wanting that makes people do stupid things. She'd make little comments like, "Must be nice to travel like that," or "I wonder what it's like to not worry about money." And I'd feel this knot in my stomach, because we were doing fine. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling. We had a nice house, decent cars, we went out to dinner, took vacations. We were solidly middle class, living the American dream, or whatever you want to call it. But apparently, solidly middle class wasn't good enough. Not when Jessica was out there living like a character from a luxury lifestyle blog. The hints started about a year ago. Subtle at first. Chloe would mention how Jessica never seemed to worry about credit card bills, how she always had money for whatever she wanted, how she'd joke about having magic cards that never seemed to max out. At the time, I'd assumed Jessica came from money or married well or had some trust fund situation going on. I didn't think much of it because honestly, Jessica's financial situation was none of my business, and I had my own job to worry about. But now I'm wondering if those conversations were less about admiration and more about aspiration. Like Chloe was studying a blueprint for a lifestyle upgrade she couldn't afford legally. So she was exploring other options. So after the bathroom incident, let's call it what it was. The "I caught my wife rifling through my passport like a burglar casing a joint" incident. I decided to run a little experiment, a test, a trap, so beautiful and elegant that if this were a heist movie, someone would definitely steal my idea and make millions off it. I created the bait, and let me tell you, this bait was premium, top shelf. The kind of bait that would make even an honest person pause and consider their moral compass. I set up a brand new credit card account. Not through my regular bank, I'm not an idiot, but through a secondary institution I use for work-related expenses. I loaded it with $57,000.
Yes, you read that right. 57 grand. Enough money to make someone's eyes go wide and their better judgment take an extended vacation to somewhere far away. It was a mix of my own money and a line of credit I could access for work purposes, all perfectly legal and above board on my end. Then I programmed every single alarm, alert, and notification system known to modern banking on that sucker. GPS tracking for every transaction, merchant ID logging, international purchase alerts, unusual spending pattern flags, time of day notifications. Hell, I probably could have set up an alert for when the magnetic strip got swiped if the technology existed. This card was wired up like a Christmas tree designed by paranoid security experts, which, coincidentally, is exactly what I am. I put the card in my everyday bag, not hidden, not tucked away in some secret pocket, just casually placed in the wallet compartment where anyone rifling through my stuff, say a curious wife looking for hardware store receipts, would easily find it. It was shiny and new with my name embossed on it in that fancy metallic font that makes you feel important. It practically screamed, "Use me!" Then I waited, and I grinned. I grinned like a man who just hid the last slice of cake in his sock drawer and was waiting to see who'd go looking for it. Because if Chloe was innocent, if I was just being paranoid and reading too much into a simple moment of her looking for a receipt, then nothing would happen. The card would sit there, unused. I'd feel like a jackass for a few days, and we'd go back to our normal lives. But if I was right, if my instincts were correct and Chloe was planning something, then this card was about to become the star witness in a case that would make my career look like amateur hour. I told myself jokes to cope with the weirdness of the situation. I'd sit at my desk at work and think, if she spends it on a spa day, at least she'll get massages for her guilt. Maybe they offer a forgiveness facial or a conscience-cleansing deep tissue treatment. Dark humor is what keeps people like me sane when we're watching our lives potentially fall apart in real time. Chloe had no idea. She went about her days completely normal. She'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, text me updates about her day, send me funny memes she found online. We'd have dinner together, and she'd tell me about her afternoon with Jessica, about the new restaurant they tried, or the boutique they browsed through. She was the perfect wife. Attentive, loving, completely and utterly full of crap, because those questions kept coming. How do you track international purchases? What's the difference between fraud and unauthorized use? Can someone dispute a charge if they claim they didn't make it? She'd ask them so casually, like she was making small talk. But I was listening now, really listening. And every question sounded less like curiosity and more like research. I'd answer her, keeping my tone light and educational, all while my brain was cataloging every word. I was playing chess while she thought we were playing checkers.
Except the board was our marriage, and the pieces were our entire future. Dramatic, maybe, but you try staying calm when you're pretty sure your spouse is planning to commit fraud using your identity and see how level-headed you remain. The card sat in my bag for 3 days. 3 days of me checking my phone obsessively, waiting for alerts that didn't come. 3 days of wondering if I was losing my mind, if I'd let paranoia turn me into the kind of person who booby-traps their own marriage. 3 days of Chloe being perfectly normal, which somehow made everything worse. And then, on day 4, my phone started buzzing. Not just buzzing, orchestrating. Alert after alert after alert. Like my phone had suddenly become a one-man band, and the only song it knew was "Someone Spending Your Money." The game was on, and Chloe had no idea she'd just stepped into a trap designed by someone who'd spent 15 years catching people exactly like her. You know that feeling when you're sitting in a meeting, nodding politely while someone drones on about quarterly projections or synergistic paradigm shifts or whatever corporate buzzword salad is trendy this week, and your phone starts vibrating in your pocket like it's trying to escape? Yeah, that was my Thursday afternoon. Except instead of some spam caller trying to sell me an extended car warranty, it was my entire financial surveillance system having a complete meltdown.
I was at a client meeting downtown, one of those glass and steel office buildings where everything is chrome and uncomfortable modern furniture designed by people who apparently hate the human spine. The client was a mid-sized tech company worried about employee expense fraud, which in hindsight is pretty ironic considering what was happening in my own life at that exact moment. I was doing my professional fraud analyst routine, nodding thoughtfully, making intelligent sounds of agreement, probably saying things like, and absolutely, while my brain was on autopilot because I've given this same presentation about 200 times. Then my phone started buzzing. Once, twice, 3, 4. By the sixth buzz, I was pretty sure either the world was ending or someone was having a medical emergency. Or, and this was the option I was really hoping wasn't true, Chloe had found my bait card and decided to go on a shopping spree that would make a real housewife look financially responsible. I excused myself from the meeting with that universal, "I'm so sorry, but this might be urgent" face that every working professional has perfected. You know the one, apologetic but firm, suggesting that whatever's happening on your phone is definitely more important than talking about database protocols, but you're too polite to say it out loud. I stepped into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and felt my stomach drop like I'd just gone over the first hill of a roller coaster I definitely didn't buy tickets for. 11 alerts. 11! In the span of maybe 20 minutes, my phone screen looked like a slot machine that had just hit jackpot, except instead of winning money, I was watching it disappear in real time. First alert. $3,200 at the Ashton Grand, a downtown luxury hotel. The kind of place where the lobby has a chandelier that probably costs more than my car, and the coffee is served in cups that look like they belong in a museum. I knew the place. I've driven past it about 1,000,000 times, but never actually gone inside, because I'm not the kind of guy who spends $200 a night for a bed when I have a perfectly good one at home. Second alert, $1,450 at Serenity Spa and Wellness. Because apparently after dropping $3,000 on a hotel room, the logical next step is to get a massage that costs more than most people's monthly grocery budget. I could practically see it. Chloe lying on some heated table while someone with gentle hands and essential oils worked out the tension in her shoulders. Must be stressful committing fraud. Really takes it out of you. Better get that deep tissue treatment. I stood there in that sterile office hallway under fluorescent lights that made everything look vaguely post-apocalyptic, and I felt this weird mix of emotions. Anger, obviously. Betrayal, definitely. But also, and I'm not proud of this, a tiny bit of professional admiration. Because this wasn't impulse shopping. This wasn't someone finding a credit card and going, "Ooh, shiny," and buying whatever caught their eye at the nearest mall. This was methodical, planned, strategic. I ditched the meeting, told the client something came up, family emergency, we'd reschedule. Sent my apologies through my assistant, who definitely thought I was being weird, but was too professional to say anything. I practically ran to my car in the parking garage, got inside, locked the doors like I was about to do something illegal, and pulled up my fraud monitoring dashboard on my phone. The data was beautiful. Terrible, relationship ending, possibly divorce-inducing, but beautiful. Every transaction came with a timestamp, GPS coordinates, merchant category codes, even the last 4 digits of the card used, which, surprise, surprise, matched my bait card exactly. I could track Chloe's afternoon like I was following a treasure map, except the treasure was my money and the map led straight to Betrayal Island. But here's where it got really interesting. This wasn't just random spending. The purchases had a pattern, a rhythm. The hotel charge came first, which made sense, secure a base of operations. Then the spa, probably to celebrate or relax or convince herself that what she was doing was somehow justified. And then, about 40 minutes after the spa charge, another alert popped up. 2 first-class tickets to London Heathrow, departing in 3 days. 2 tickets, not 1. I sat in my car and stared at that notification like it might change if I looked at it long enough. 2 first-class tickets, which meant Chloe wasn't going alone, which meant this wasn't some solo adventure of self-discovery or whatever rationalization she might use later.
She had a partner, an accomplice, a +1 for her felony vacation. I clicked through to the detailed transaction info because, yes, I'm that thorough, and also because I've spent 15 years learning exactly how to extract every possible piece of data from a purchase. The ticket purchase came from a travel booking site, and buried in the merchant data was passenger information. 2 names. One was Chloe Elizabeth Hale, my wife of 7 years, the woman who promised to love and honor me and apparently decided honor was more of a suggestion than a commitment. The other name was Ethan Grant. Ethan. Ethan with the perfectly styled hair and the finance job and the Instagram photos of himself at wine tastings and golf courses. Ethan, who I'd met exactly twice at dinner parties, and both times thought he was the kind of guy who definitely peaked in high school but was still dining out on that glory 20 years later. Ethan, who was apparently now Chloe's travel companion for an international fraud spree funded by my money. I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I laughed. Not a happy laugh, more like the kind of laugh that happens when your brain short-circuits because reality has become so absurd that laughter is the only response that makes sense. I sat in my car in that parking garage, surrounded by concrete and the faint smell of exhaust fumes, and I laughed until my sides hurt. Then I pulled myself together, because laughing about your wife stealing from you is only therapeutic for about 90 seconds before it becomes deeply sad. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to figure out my next move, because clearly Chloe had already figured out hers. I pulled up my contacts and found Agent Reynolds' number. I'd worked with her on a few cases over the years, enough that we had a professional rapport, and she knew I wasn't the kind of guy who cried wolf. I typed out a message, "Need to talk, got a situation, fraud case, but personal. Can you meet?" Her response came back in under a minute. "Office, 1 hour, bring evidence." I started the car and headed home first, because if I was going to burn my marriage to the ground, I was going to make damn sure I had receipts. Literally. I pulled into the driveway, walked inside, and went straight to my office. I pulled up every alert, screenshot every transaction, downloaded every piece of merchant data the system had captured. I created a folder on my desktop labeled Evidence because subtlety was no longer part of this equation. Then I checked the rest of my accounts, just to be thorough. Everything else was fine. No unusual activity, no mysterious charges, no signs that Chloe had gone beyond the bait card, which meant she'd taken the bait exactly as planned. Hook, line, and sinker. She'd found the card, saw the high limit, probably checked the balance online, and watched those 5 zeros glow on her screen like a beacon of terrible decisions. And she decided to help herself to an all-expenses-paid lifestyle upgrade.
Before I left for Reynolds' office, I did one more thing. I checked the purchase history against a calendar. Started looking back through the last few months, cross-referencing dates, and that's when I found it. Small charges here and there, different merchants, different amounts, but always when I was away on business trips or client meetings. Always when I wouldn't notice a few hundred missing here or there. This wasn't Chloe's first rodeo. This was just the first time she'd gotten greedy enough to take the bait I dangled in front of her. I made a joke to myself as I drove to Reynolds' office, because humor was the only thing keeping me from driving my car into a wall. 2 tickets to London, I muttered. She must have remembered our anniversary, which was, last decade. Real thoughtful of her. The city traffic was terrible as always. I sat at red lights and watched people cross the street. Normal people living normal lives, probably not dealing with spouses who were currently planning international fraud trips. I envied them. Then I pulled up the map on my monitoring system one more time and watched the little dots light up like a constellation. A treasure hunt I never signed up for, marking every place my money had gone while I was sitting in a meeting talking about expense reports. The irony wasn't lost on me, not even a little bit. By the time the sun set on what I'm now calling the day my marriage became a federal case, the bait card had racked up $48,700 in charges. 48 grand in less than 8 hours. That's more than most Americans make in a year. Gone faster than you can say identity theft 3 times fast. Hotels that cost more per night than my first car. Dinners at restaurants where the waiters probably have better dental plans than I do. Boutique shopping sprees at places where they don't put price tags on anything because if you have to ask, you clearly stumbled into the wrong tax bracket. I sat in my home office, the spare bedroom we'd converted when we bought the house, back when "we" meant something and "ours" wasn't just a legal term that was about to get really complicated. And I watched the charges roll in like waves hitting a beach during a hurricane. Each alert was another gut punch, another lie exposed, another piece of the life I thought I had crumbling into dust. The transaction log read like someone's fever dream of luxury living. $300 at a wine bar, $1,800 at some designer clothing store I'd never heard of, $2,000 at a jewelry boutique. And sprinkled throughout, smaller charges at coffee shops and restaurants, like Chloe was living out some kind of romantic comedy montage. Except the romance was fraud and the comedy was my complete oblivion to what was happening. One transaction caught my eye because it was so specific, so perfectly detailed in the merchant data. A dinner reservation at Marcello's, this insanely high-end Italian place downtown where reservations book out 3 months in advance, and the pasta probably costs more than my monthly water bill. The charge was $643 for dinner, 2 people. The transaction detail even included a name on the reservation, Ethan. Ethan. There he was again, Mr. First-Class Ticket to London himself, now enjoying what I could only assume was some kind of celebratory meal funded entirely by my money. I imagined them sitting there, clinking wine glasses, probably laughing about how easy this all was, how I was just some clueless fraud analyst who couldn't even detect fraud happening in his own wallet. The mental image made me want to throw my laptop through the window. But computers are expensive, and I'd already lost enough money today, so I settled for clenching my jaw so hard I probably could have cracked walnuts. Around 7 p.m., my phone rang. Not an alert this time, an actual call. Chloe's face popped up on the screen, the photo I'd taken of her last summer at the beach, smiling and happy and looking nothing like someone currently committing multiple felonies across state lines. I let it ring twice while I decided how to play this. Answer cheerfully like nothing was wrong, let it go to voicemail, answer in character as the clueless husband she clearly thought I was. I went with option 3. "Hey, babe," I said, injecting just enough warmth into my voice to sound normal, but not so much that I'd have to hate myself later for the performance. "Hey, honey." Her voice was bright, energetic, practically glowing through the phone. "I'm having the most amazing day. Jessica surprised me with a spa retreat, completely last-minute thing. We're at the Serenity Spa downtown. Have you heard of it? It's incredible. They have this hot stone massage that literally melts all your stress away." I bet it does, I thought. Must be really stressful committing fraud. All that lying and sneaking around probably creates a lot of muscle tension. Thank God my money could pay for someone to rub that guilt right out of your shoulders. "That's great," I said. My voice was dry as the Sahara, but apparently Chloe was too high on spa treatments and theft to notice. "Sounds relaxing." "It really is. Jessica is treating me to the whole package. Facials, massage, the works. She's so generous." Chloe's voice had that dreamy quality people get when they're really enjoying themselves, completely unaware that their entire world is about to implode. "I should be home around 9 or so. Want me to pick up dinner?" The audacity, the sheer breathtaking audacity of this woman to spend nearly $50,000 of my money and then offer to pick up dinner on her way home like she was doing me a favor? I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Jessica wasn't treating her to anything, that I knew exactly who was paying for this little spa adventure, and that she should probably enjoy that hot stone massage because the next place she'd be relaxing was a federal detention center where the amenities were significantly less luxurious. Instead, I said, "No thanks, I'll figure something out. Have fun, love you." She chirped and hung up before I could decide whether to respond. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen like it might offer some explanation for how my life had turned into a crime drama. Love you. She'd said it so easily, so casually, like those words still meant something, like they hadn't become completely meaningless the second she decided to rifle through my bag and steal my identity. I pulled myself together. Professionalism is a hell of a drug, and went back to the transaction logs, started building a timeline, creating a spreadsheet, because that's what you do when your personal life becomes a case file. Date, time, merchant, amount, location. Each row was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. But I needed more than just the bait card data. If I was going to do this right, if I was going to make sure this entire mess resulted in something more than just a divorce and hurt feelings, I needed to dig deeper. I needed to know if this was a pattern, if Chloe had done this before, if there were other victims. I started going through our shared accounts, looking back months, bank statements, credit card bills. I pulled up Chloe's phone records from our cellular account. We were on a family plan, which meant I had access to call logs and text message metadata. I couldn't see the actual messages, but I could see who she was talking to and when. And guess whose number showed up about 600 times in the last 3 months? Ethan. Good old Ethan with his wine tastings and his first-class plane tickets funded by my bank account. Then I did something that probably violated about 12 different privacy laws, but at this point I was way past caring about being the good guy. I checked Chloe's laptop. She'd left it on the kitchen counter that morning, and we'd always had each other's passwords. One of those couple things that seemed sweet and trusting at the time, but now just seemed stupid. I opened it up, went straight to her email, and started reading. Most of it was boring. Spam emails from stores, newsletter subscriptions, email chains with Jessica about brunch plans and Instagram-worthy restaurants. But then I found a folder tucked away in her email archive labeled Travel Ideas. I clicked it open and felt my blood pressure spike into territory that probably required medical attention. Emails, dozens of them, booking confirmations for hotels I'd never heard her mention, flight itineraries to Paris, Barcelona, Miami, all from the last 8 months, all charged to credit cards that I didn't recognize the numbers for. I cross-referenced the dates with my own calendar and realized something that made my hands shake. Every single trip coincided with times I'd been away for work. When I was in Seattle for a conference, she was in Paris. When I was in Boston meeting clients, she was in Barcelona. When I thought she was having quiet weekends at home, she was living it up in South Beach. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't Chloe finding my bait card and making a stupid impulse decision. This was systematic, practiced, professional almost. She'd been doing this for months, maybe longer, and I'd been completely clueless. I kept digging, found more emails. These ones from someone named David Chen at a luxury watch store downtown. Casual, friendly emails thanking Chloe for her help with inventory and customer service. Chloe had never mentioned working at a watch store. She had a part-time gig doing social media management for a few small businesses, working from home mostly. When had she been helping at a watch store? I Googled the store. Prestige timepieces, high-end luxury watches, the kind that cost more than a semester of college. I looked at their Instagram, their website, their Yelp reviews, and there, buried in a photo from 4 months ago, captioned, "Our amazing team," was Chloe, standing behind the counter, smiling, wearing a name tag. The pieces started clicking together in my head like the worst puzzle ever. A luxury watch store where wealthy people come in and buy expensive things and hand over their credit cards to be processed. Where someone working the counter could easily photograph card numbers, expiration dates, security codes. where someone with access to the transaction system could collect names, addresses, all the information you'd need to commit identity theft on a scale that would make most criminals jealous. I made a joke to Agent Reynolds later when I showed her all this information. "She always loved designer watches," I said, my voice completely flat. "Now she's stealing time." Reynolds didn't laugh. She just looked at me with this expression that was half pity, half professional interest, like I was simultaneously a victim and a really fascinating case study. But sitting there in my office that night, laptop open to emails that documented months of fraud, phones still showing alerts from charges that were still rolling in, I didn't feel like joking. I felt like an idiot. A complete, absolute idiot who'd been married to a criminal and never saw it coming, despite the fact that catching criminals was literally my job. Chloe came home at 9:15, glowing and relaxed from her spa day, carrying takeout from some trendy place because apparently she decided to pick up dinner anyway. She kissed me on the cheek, told me about her amazing afternoon, showed me her nails, freshly manicured, probably another charge I'd find later on the transaction log. I smiled, ate the dinner she brought, made appropriate sounds of interest while she talked. And the whole time I was thinking about federal prison sentences and asset seizure and how good she was at lying. Because if I hadn't seen the evidence myself, I'd never have known. She was that convincing. The ledger I'd eventually find would tell a bigger story. But that night, with $48,700 gone and a marriage that was already over, except for the paperwork, I just sat there and watched my wife describe her perfect day, funded entirely by fraud. Agent Reynolds called me at 7:30 the next morning, which is either really early or perfectly reasonable, depending on whether you're a morning person or someone who values sleep like a normal human being. I was already awake, hadn't really slept, to be honest. Sitting at my kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at spreadsheets like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Federal Building, 9 a.m. Bring everything. Her voice had that clipped, efficient quality that government agents develop after years of dealing with bureaucracy and criminals who think they're smarter than the system. No pleasantries. No, "How are you holding up?" Just straight to business, which honestly I appreciated because I wasn't in the mood for sympathy. The Federal Building was one of those aggressively modern glass structures downtown that looks like someone asked an architect to design intimidation as a physical space, and they absolutely nailed the assignment. Too many windows, too much natural light, security checkpoints that make airport TSA look casual. I went through the metal detectors, got my visitor badge, and followed the escort to Reynolds' office on the 7th floor. Her office was exactly what you'd expect. Functional, organized, walls covered with commendations and certificates that proved she was very good at catching bad guys. She had one of those massive monitors that showed about 15 different windows of data simultaneously, the kind of setup that makes you either feel like a spy or develop an instant headache. Reynolds herself was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who probably saw through every lie you told before you even finished telling it. "Coffee?" she offered, gesturing to a pot that looked like it had been sitting there since the Clinton administration. "I'm good," I said, which was a lie, but I'd learned my lesson about Federal Building coffee during my FBI days. Some mistakes you only make once. I laid out everything on her desk, printed transaction logs, screenshots of the emails, the timeline I'd built showing Chloe's trips coordinated with my work travel, photos of her at the watch store, bank statements with highlighted charges. It looked like the evidence board from a crime show, except instead of tracking a serial killer, we were tracking my wife's systematic fraud operation. Reynolds went through it methodically, making notes, asking questions, pulling up databases on her computer to cross-reference information. And that's when things got really interesting, or really terrible, depending on your perspective, probably both. "This isn't her first rodeo," Reynolds said after about 20 minutes of silent review. She turned her monitor toward me, showing a flagged transaction report. "We've had alerts on similar patterns before, different cards, but same geographic markers. Paris, Barcelona, Miami, luxury hotels, high-end boutiques. The algorithm flagged them as potential fraud rings, but we didn't have enough to build a case until now." She pulled up more data, victim reports from other cardholders who'd noticed unauthorized charges. All the purchases had the same signature. Calculated amounts, just under reporting thresholds, luxury merchants, international locations. The kind of fraud that looks almost legitimate if you're not paying close attention, which most people aren't until their credit card bill arrives and they realize someone charged $8,000 to a hotel in Paris while they were sitting at home in Ohio watching Netflix. Your wife wasn't working alone, Reynolds continued, clicking through screens. The watch store, prestige timepieces. We're going to need to take a hard look at their operation. If she had access to customer card information, that's a gold mine for someone building a fraud portfolio. I felt sick, not because I was surprised. At this point, Chloe could have told me she was secretly an international spy, and I would have just nodded and added it to the list. But because the scope of this was so much bigger than I'd realized. This wasn't just my wife stealing from me. This was my wife potentially stealing from dozens, maybe hundreds of people. People who'd walked into a luxury watch store, made legitimate purchases, handed over their credit cards, and had no idea that the friendly woman behind the counter was photographing their information for later use. The watch store owner, I said, David Chen, is he involved? Reynolds shrugged. That's what we need to find out. Could be complicit, could be another victim, could be completely oblivious. We'll bring him in for questioning. She made another note, then looked at me with an expression that was probably meant to be reassuring, but mostly just looked tired. You did good work here, Mark. I know this is personal, but you documented everything perfectly. Makes my job a hell of a lot easier. Great, I said flatly. Glad my imploding marriage could contribute to your case clearance rate. She almost smiled. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. This sucks. Yeah. I leaned back in the uncomfortable government-issue chair. It really does. Reynolds outlined the next steps. They'd coordinate with financial crimes units, pull records from the watch store, contact victims, build a comprehensive case. They'd need to move carefully. If Chloe suspected she was being investigated, she might run, destroy evidence, alert other people potentially involved in the operation. The London tickets were in 3 days, which gave them a narrow window. We'll flag her at customs, Reynolds said. Let her think everything's fine. Let her get on that plane if she tries, and then we pick her up when she lands back in the States. Harder to run when you're already in custody. I nodded, processing the reality that my wife was about to become a federal fugitive risk, that I was sitting in a government building, actively helping to build a case against the person I'd promised to love and cherish. That somewhere right now, Chloe was probably at home or meeting Ethan or planning her next move, completely unaware that everything was about to come crashing down. Reynolds walked me out, shook my hand at the elevator, told me she'd be in touch. I rode down 7 floors in silence, walked through the lobby, past the security checkpoints, and stepped out into the morning sunshine, feeling like I'd just left a different universe. People walked past on the sidewalk, normal people doing normal things, and I wondered if any of them were one bad decision away from having their lives turn into federal cases. I called David Chen on the way to my car, kept my voice casual, friendly, like I was just a curious guy asking innocent questions. Hey, this might sound weird, but my wife Chloe mentioned she's been helping out at your store. I wanted to maybe surprise her with something, thought I'd come by. His response told me everything I needed to know. Confusion, hesitation, the sound of someone realizing they'd been played. Chloe? She was great. Yeah, helped us during our busy season a few months back. Haven't seen her recently, though. Everything okay? Yeah, all good, I lied. Just wanted to check. Thanks, man. I hung up and sat in my car, watching the federal building in my rearview mirror like it might follow me home. Here's something they don't tell you about investigating your own spouse. At some point, you cross a line from gathering evidence into full-blown paranoid detective mode, and there's really no coming back from that. I crossed that line around 10 a.m. on Friday morning, when I decided that if Chloe had been stupid enough to keep emails documenting her fraud operation, maybe she'd been stupid enough to keep physical records too. Because criminals, even smart ones, have this weird compulsion to document their crimes. It's like they can't help themselves. They keep trophies, journals, spreadsheets. It's a psychological thing that I learned about in my FBI training and have seen play out in about 100 cases since. So I went home during my lunch break, told my assistant I had a dentist appointment, which is the universal excuse for leaving work that nobody ever questions because nobody wants to hear about your dental problems. And I started searching, not randomly, methodically, like the professional investigator I am. Except now the crime scene was my own bedroom, and that felt about as wrong as you'd imagine. I started with the obvious places, her desk drawers, nothing but old receipts and makeup samples, and about 40 different pens that probably didn't work. Her closet, just clothes and shoes, and a collection of handbags that suddenly seemed a lot more suspicious given what I now knew about her shopping habits. Her nightstand, books, chapstick, one of those sleep masks that blocks out light, completely innocent. Then I moved to her jewelry box. It was one of those fancy wooden ones with multiple compartments and a little ballerina that spins when you open it, which Chloe thought was charming and I thought was vaguely creepy in that uncanny valley kind of way. She kept it on her dresser right out in the open, because why would you hide a jewelry box? It's supposed to be visible. That's where normal people keep their jewelry. Except Chloe, as I was learning, was not normal. I opened the top layer. Earrings, necklaces, a few rings, nothing unusual. Second layer, more of the same, plus a watch I'd given her for our 5th anniversary that apparently wasn't fancy enough because it was still sitting there unworn.
Third layer, and this is where things got interesting. I felt something hard underneath the velvet liner. Not jewelry-shaped, rectangular, flat. I pulled out the liner, and there it was. A small black notebook. The kind you can buy at any drugstore for $3. Completely unassuming. The type of thing that could contain grocery lists or workout routines or literally anything innocent. Except when I opened it, what I found was definitely not a grocery list. Unless Chloe had started shopping for credit card numbers and expiration dates at Whole Foods. Page after page of handwritten entries, names, card numbers, expiration dates, security codes, cities, dates of use, dollar amounts. It was a ledger, an actual, physical, incredibly incriminating ledger, documenting every single fraudulent transaction Chloe had made over the past year, maybe longer. I flipped through it, my hands shaking slightly, and felt this bizarre mix of horror and vindication. Horror because, holy hell, my wife was keeping a criminal diary like some kind of delusional accountant. Vindication because this was evidence so solid you could build a house on it. There were at least 40 different cards listed, 40 victims, names I didn't recognize, probably people who'd shopped at the watch store and had no idea their information had been compromised. Next to each card number were notations: Paris Hotel, Barcelona Shopping, Miami Restaurants. Like Chloe was keeping track of her own personal fraud portfolio for tax purposes or something equally insane. I stood there in my bedroom holding this notebook, and I couldn't decide whether to laugh or throw something through the window. The sheer audacity of keeping physical records, the complete lack of operational security. This was the kind of mistake that got criminals caught every single day. And Chloe had made it with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed she'd never be discovered. I photographed every page, used my phone, made sure the lighting was good, double-checked that every number and notation was clearly visible. Then I texted Reynolds. Found something. You're gonna want to see this. Her response was immediate. Bring it in, now. I wrapped the notebook in a plastic bag because I'd watched enough crime shows to know about preserving evidence, even though this wasn't technically a crime scene, and I probably didn't need to worry about fingerprints since they were definitely Chloe's, and I put it in my briefcase like I was carrying nuclear codes. Then I carefully replaced the velvet liner in the jewelry box, closed all the compartments, made sure everything looked exactly like I'd found it. If Chloe came home and noticed the notebook was missing, the game would be over before we could coordinate the arrest. On the drive back to the Federal Building, I called Reynolds and gave her the rundown. She briefed me on what they'd found: international transaction alerts, coordination with UK Customs, red flags from multiple financial institutions. They'd contacted David.
Chen at the watch store, and he was cooperating fully, which is law enforcement speak for scared out of his mind and telling us everything. Turns out Chloe had worked there for 4 months, always volunteering for the register, always friendly with customers, always helpful, the perfect employee, the perfect cover. "This ledger," Reynolds said when I handed it over in her office 20 minutes later, "this is the smoking gun. With this and the transaction data, we have her dead to rights. Interstate fraud, identity theft, probably money laundering given the amounts and international movement. This is federal prison time, Mark. Years." I nodded, watching her flip through pages, watching her expression shift from professional interest to something closer to amazement. "She documented everything," Reynolds continued. "Every card, every purchase, every trip. It's like she wanted to get caught." "She thought she was smarter than everyone else," I said quietly. "Thought she'd never get caught because I was too stupid to notice and everyone else was too busy to care." Reynolds looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "The Crown Prosecution Service in the UK is going to want copies of this. Those flight tickets, the international purchases, this has jurisdiction implications. You might have just handed us a case that crosses the Atlantic." My ego felt oddly honored by that. My marriage felt like it had been run over by a freight train, then backed over for good measure, then set on fire just to make sure it was really dead. But hey, at least I was contributing to international law enforcement cooperation, silver linings and all that. Reynolds coordinated next steps. Surveillance on Chloe, monitoring of her accounts, preparation for the airport arrest. Everything was moving fast now, the machinery of federal justice grinding into gear. I signed paperwork, gave official statements, became a witness in what was now a federal investigation. When I left the federal building that afternoon, the notebook safely in evidence custody, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying this weight I didn't even know was there and finally putting it down. The truth was out there now, documented and photographed and filed away in government databases. Chloe's perfect crime preserved forever in case files and evidence locks. I stopped for coffee on the way home. Actual good coffee from a local place, not federal building sludge, and made a dark joke to the barista without meaning to. "Rough day at work?" she asked, probably because I looked like someone who'd just watched their life implode. "You could say that," I replied. "Found out my wife's been running a fraud operation. But hey, at least she kept good records." The barista laughed nervously, clearly unsure if I was joking. I wasn't sure either, honestly. The line between tragedy and comedy had gotten pretty blurry.
Chapter 7. The Sting at the Airport. Waiting for the other shoe to drop is psychological torture. I know this because I spent the next 3 days living in a state of suspended reality where I had to pretend everything was fine while knowing that my wife was about to get arrested at an airport by federal agents. It's like watching a car accident happen in slow motion, except you're also in the car and also the one who called the cops and also somehow still expected to show up for Thanksgiving dinner and act normal. Chloe spent those 3 days packing, cheerfully packing. She'd laid out clothes on the guest bed. Our house has a guest bed that nobody ever uses, except apparently for organizing international fraud trips, and she kept asking me questions like, "Does London get cold in November? And should I bring the blue dress or the black one?" And I'd sit there, coffee in hand, soul slowly dying, and say things like, "Definitely the blue one," while internally screaming. She showed me the itinerary she'd printed out. First-class tickets, my money. 5-star hotel in Kensington, also my money. Dinner reservations at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, you guessed it, my money. She was planning this trip with the enthusiasm of someone who'd won a vacation sweepstakes, not someone who'd funded it through systematic identity theft. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. "I'm so excited," she said on Sunday night, 2 days before the flight. "Jessica's never been to London. It's going to be amazing." Still using Jessica as cover. Still lying with the ease of someone who'd been practicing for months. I wanted to tell her that Jessica wasn't going, that Ethan was, that I knew everything. But Reynolds had been crystal clear. Act normal. Don't tip her off. Let her get comfortable. The arrest would be clean and public and impossible to run from. Monday morning, Chloe texted me pictures.
Her at the spa getting her nails done, getting London ready. Smoothies from some overpriced juice bar, pre-travel detox. A rooftop sunset photo, last Austin sunset before the trip. Each photo felt like a mockery, like she was documenting her own crime spree in real time and posting it for the world to see. I responded with thumbs up emojis and smiley faces while forwarding every single image to Reynolds for the case file. Agent Reynolds coordinated with TSA and Customs at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. They flagged Chloe's ticket, set up secondary inspection, prepared the arrest protocol. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let her check in normally, go through security, get comfortable, then at the gate, pull her for random additional screening and execute the arrest away from crowds. Clean, efficient, minimal scene. The kind of operation that happens at airports every day without most travelers even noticing. Tuesday morning, flight day. I woke up at 5 a.m., even though my alarm wasn't set until 6. Couldn't sleep. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Chloe move around the house, dragging her suitcase, checking and rechecking her passport. The passport she'd been studying in my gym bag weeks ago. Everything had led to this moment, and now that it was here, I felt weirdly empty. Not angry anymore, not betrayed, just tired. "You sure you don't want to drive me?" Chloe asked at the door. Her suitcase packed with clothes bought with stolen money. Her ticket funded by fraud. Her entire trip built on a foundation of felonies. "Big client meeting this morning," I lied smoothly, because I'd gotten pretty good at lying over the past week too. "Text me when you land." She kissed me goodbye. Actually kissed me on the lips, like we were a normal couple saying normal goodbyes before a normal trip. "Love you," she said. I didn't say it back. Just smiled and waved as she got into her Uber, because of course she wasn't driving herself. Why leave a car at the airport when you can charge the ride to someone else's card? I watched the car pull away. Then I got in my own car and drove to the airport, because Reynolds had invited me to watch from the security office, and there was no way in hell I was missing this. The TSA security office at Austin Bergstrom is in a part of the airport regular travelers never see. Behind the scenes, up some stairs, through doors that require badges and security clearance. Reynolds met me there along with 2 other agents, whose names I immediately forgot, because my brain was running on adrenaline and spite at this point. The office had monitors showing every security checkpoint, every gate, every corner of the terminal. Big Brother had nothing on airport surveillance. We watched Chloe check in at the British Airways counter. She was wearing the blue dress. Good choice, I thought bitterly. She smiled at the ticket agent, probably made small talk, got her boarding pass and baggage claim tickets. Everything normal, everything routine. "She's traveling alone?" one of the agents asked, checking his notes. "Supposed to be meeting someone at the gate," Reynolds explained. "The boyfriend, he's got a separate ticket, different confirmation number. We'll pick him up too." I watched Chloe go through TSA pre-check, because of course she had pre-check, probably signed up using one of her stolen cards, and breeze through security with the ease of someone who travels frequently. She grabbed her bag from the conveyor belt, slipped her shoes back on, and headed toward her gate like she didn't have a care in the world. Then I saw Ethan. He showed up about 15 minutes later, also checking in, also going through security, also completely oblivious. He was wearing one of those expensive casual outfits that screams, "I have money, but I'm trying to look approachable." Designer jeans, button-down shirt, leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I hated him on principle, but I also felt a tiny bit sorry for him because he clearly had no idea what he was walking into. They met at the gate. I watched on the monitors as Chloe lit up when she saw him. As they hugged, as they sat down in the gate area and talked and laughed like they were about to have the adventure of a lifetime, which, I guess in a way they were, just not the kind they were expecting. Reynolds checked her watch. "Customs is ready. TSA's in position. We move in 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. I watched Chloe sip her coffee, airport coffee, which she usually hated, but today apparently it was fine. I watched Ethan scroll through his phone, watched other passengers board the flight,
Normal people taking normal trips, completely unaware that in a few minutes, 2 of their fellow passengers were about to be arrested by federal agents. "Now," Reynolds said quietly into her radio. 2 TSA agents approached Chloe and Ethan. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see their body language. Professional, calm, no drama. Chloe looked confused. Ethan looked annoyed. They both stood up, grabbed their carry-ons, and followed the agents toward a side corridor away from the main gate area. That's when the customs officers moved in. Badge flash, handcuffs. The universal "you're under arrest" posture that every cop in the world seems to know instinctively. Chloe's face went from confused to shocked to terrified in about 3 seconds. Ethan just looked stunned, like his brain was still trying to process what was happening. I stood there in the security office watching on monitors, and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just this weird sense of finality, like closing a book you didn't particularly enjoy but felt obligated to finish anyway. Reynolds glanced at me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. And it was true. I was okay. Not great, not happy, but okay. "Can I go now?" She nodded. "We'll need you for testimony eventually, but for now, you're done. Good work." I left the airport through the back way, avoiding the terminal entirely, and drove home in silence. When I got there, the house felt different, quieter, emptier, but also somehow cleaner, like someone had opened all the windows and let out air that had been stale for years. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't check my phone for fraud alerts, didn't monitor transactions, didn't worry about what Chloe was doing, or where she was, or whose money she was spending. The alerts had stopped. The case was closed. The rest was just paperwork.
Chapter 8. Arrest and the Phone Call. They took Chloe to the Travis County Jail first, standard procedure for federal arrests made at the airport. It's this massive concrete complex off Highway 183 that looks exactly like what you'd imagine a jail to look like. Gray, depressing, surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras. The kind of place where hope goes to die. I didn't go there, didn't want to. Reynolds called me around 2 p.m. to confirm the arrest had been processed and Chloe was officially in custody. She asked for her phone call, Reynolds said. "Fair warning, she'll probably try you first." I said, "Thanks," and hung up. Then I sat there staring at my phone like it was a live grenade, waiting for it to ring. It took about 45 minutes. When Chloe's name popped up on my screen, except it wasn't her phone, it was the jail's number with her name attached, because that's how those systems work. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted her to sweat a little. Maybe I was just delaying the inevitable. Maybe I'm petty and vindictive and turning into the kind of person who enjoys watching people squirm. Probably all 3. "Mark?" Her voice was broken, human, and I hated that some part of me still felt something when I heard it. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Not warm, not cold, just flat. "Mark, there's been a mistake. They arrested me at the airport. They think I stole credit cards or something. It's insane. I need you to call a lawyer. Tell them you gave me permission to use your card. Tell them—" "Chloe," I cut her off, and the silence that followed was so heavy I could practically feel it through the phone. "Stop talking." "But Mark, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand." I stood up, started pacing my kitchen because sitting still was impossible. "They didn't arrest you because they think you stole credit cards. They arrested you because you did steal credit cards. 40 of them, maybe more. They have evidence, logs, transaction data, a ledger with your handwriting documenting every single fraudulent purchase you made over the past year." The silence this time was different. The kind of silence that happens when someone realizes the walls are closing in and there's no way out. I could hear her breathing, sharp and panicked. And I knew she was doing the math in her head, trying to figure out how I knew, how they knew, how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. "Mark, please." "Save your breath for your lawyer," I said, and my voice came out colder than I intended, or maybe exactly as cold as I intended.
hard to tell at this point. "You're going to need it." You can't do this to me. I'm your wife." The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of playing the wife card after everything she'd done. I laughed, actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because what else was I supposed to do? Cry? Scream? Throw my phone across the room? "You stopped being my wife the second you decided to rifle through my bag and steal my identity," I said. "Everything after that, that was just you digging the hole deeper, and I gave you the shovel." "What are you talking about?" "The bait card, Chloe? The one you found in my gym bag? The one with $57,000 on it? The one you used to buy hotel rooms and spa treatments and first-class tickets to London? That was a trap." I said it. "You took it, and now you're exactly where you belong." I could hear her start to cry. Real tears, not the manipulative kind she'd probably used on me 1,000 times before without me noticing. These sounded genuine, desperate, the sound of someone's entire world collapsing in real time. And I felt nothing. Well, not nothing. I felt tired, exhausted, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that setting it down just made me realize how much damage it had done. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I never meant, I didn't think." "You didn't think you'd get caught," I finished for her. "None of you ever do. That's why people like me have jobs." I hung up before she could say anything else. Didn't give her the satisfaction of a goodbye. Didn't give her another second of my time. Just ended the call and blocked the jail's number, because if she tried calling back, I didn't want to know about it. The house was quiet. That specific kind of quiet that happens when something significant has ended and you're just sitting in the aftermath trying to figure out what comes next. I made a sandwich, turkey and cheese, nothing fancy, and ate it standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt too formal for the weird limbo state I was currently occupying. Not married, but not divorced. Not single, but definitely alone. Some kind of relationship purgatory that didn't have a clear label. My phone buzzed. Not Chloe this time. A text from Reynolds. "Arraignment tomorrow morning. Federal Courthouse. 9 a.m. You don't have to be there, but figured I'd let you know." I texted back. "Thanks. I'll pass." I didn't want to see her in an orange jumpsuit. Didn't want to watch her stand before a judge and enter a plea. Didn't want to be anywhere near the legal circus that was about to unfold. I'd done my part, gathered the evidence, built the case, handed it over to people whose job it was to handle the rest. My involvement was done, at least for now. Eventually, I'd have to testify, give depositions, probably relive this entire nightmare in front of lawyers and juries. But that was future Mark's problem. Present Mark just wanted to exist in the quiet for a while. Around 6 p.m., people started calling. My mom, who somehow already knew even though I definitely hadn't told her. Chloe's sister demanding to know what was happening and why I wasn't helping. A few friends who'd seen something on social media because apparently someone at the airport had filmed the arrest and posted it online. Because that's the world we live in now, where everyone's personal tragedy becomes content. I ignored all of them, let them go to voicemail, turned my phone on silent, and left it face down on the counter. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and about 30 text messages. News of Chloe's arrest had spread through our social circle like wildfire. Everyone wanted details. Everyone had opinions. Everyone suddenly had a story about how they always knew something was off about Chloe, which was hilarious because not a single one of these people had mentioned anything when it would have actually been useful. Someone from the watch store called too, not David Chen, but some other employee, asking if I knew what was happening because the FBI had shown up and started interviewing staff. I didn't call back. That wasn't my circus anymore. That was federal investigation territory, and I was officially just a civilian witness, trying to figure out how to move forward. The weirdest call came from Jessica, Chloe's best friend, the one whose lifestyle Chloe had been so desperate to emulate. She left a voicemail. "Mark, I had no idea. I swear to God I didn't know what she was doing. Please call me back, please." I believed her, mostly. Jessica was shallow and materialistic and probably not someone I'd choose to hang out with voluntarily, but I didn't think she was a criminal, just oblivious, just someone who lived in a bubble of privilege and never bothered to ask where the money came from. Because why would she? When you're used to luxury, you stop questioning it. I spent the day doing absolutely nothing productive. Watched TV, scrolled through my phone, ordered takeout, existed in this weird state of suspended animation where my old life was over, but my new life hadn't started yet. Somewhere across town, Chloe was sitting in a jail cell, probably still trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast, and I was sitting in a house that felt too big and too empty, trying to figure out what comes after happily ever after ends in federal prison. Chapter 9. The Courtroom and the Ledger. Federal courtrooms have a very specific aesthetic that I like to call aggressive neutrality. Everything is beige or gray or some other color that couldn't offend anyone if it tried. The floors are polished to a shine that probably violates some kind of reflection safety code. The security is tighter than airport TSA, which is saying something considering I just watched my wife get arrested at an airport. And the whole place has this smell, not bad, just institutional, like cleaning products and old paper, and the accumulated anxiety of everyone who's ever walked through those doors, knowing their life was about to change. I showed up to Chloe's arraignment on Wednesday morning, wearing my best suit, which felt weirdly performative considering I wasn't the one on trial. But Agent Reynolds had suggested I look presentable since there might be media. And sure enough, there were 2 news vans parked outside with reporters doing that thing where they stand in front of cameras and try to look serious while talking about local crime. I avoided them, slipped in through a side entrance that Reynolds had told me about, the one that courthouse regulars use to avoid the circus. The courtroom was exactly what you'd expect if you've ever watched Law & Order or any other legal drama, except somehow more boring and more intimidating at the same time. Wood paneling everywhere. An American flag that looked like it had been there since the building opened in 1987. Rows of benches that were specifically designed to be uncomfortable so nobody got too relaxed while justice was being served. I sat in the gallery, 3rd row back, trying to be invisible and probably failing because I was literally the victim and key witness in this case. Chloe was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit that did not, I'm sorry to say, complement her complexion. She looked tired, scared. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup, which for Chloe was the equivalent of showing up naked. She'd always been meticulous about her appearance, always. And now she was standing in federal court looking like someone who'd spent the night in county lockup because, well, she had. Our eyes met for maybe half a second. She looked at me with this expression that was part betrayal, part desperation, part "how could you do this to me?" which was rich considering what she'd done to me. I looked away, studied the wood paneling, counted ceiling tiles, anything to avoid engaging with the woman who'd been my wife and was now federal defendant number something or other. Ethan was arraigned separately, different time slot, which I was grateful for because I really didn't want to sit through 2 of these. One was plenty. One was more than enough emotional devastation for a Wednesday morning. The assistant U.S. attorney handling the case was a woman named Diana Ortiz, who looked like she'd been born in a suit and probably dreamed in legal citations. She was in her early 40s, no-nonsense haircut, the kind of prosecutor who'd seen every excuse and heard every sob story and stopped being impressed by either about 15 years ago. She laid out the charges with the efficiency of someone reading a grocery list, except the items on this list were felonies that carried serious prison time. Credit card fraud across state lines, identity theft involving more than 40 victims, money laundering through international transactions, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She listed them calmly, methodically, like she was describing the weather and not the systematic destruction of multiple people's financial lives. The government has substantial evidence, including transaction records, physical documentation kept by the defendant, witness testimony from the watch store where the defendant obtained card information, and cooperation from the primary victim, the defendant's husband. That last part, the defendant's husband, hit differently, hearing it said out loud in federal court.
That was me. I was the primary victim. Not just a victim, the primary one. The star witness in my own marriage's destruction. Clodo's defense attorney was a public defender who looked about 12 years old and completely overwhelmed. He tried, give him credit, he tried. He argued that Chloe had ties to the community, no prior record, wasn't a flight risk, despite being arrested, literally trying to board an international flight. He painted her as a good person who made bad choices, someone who deserved a chance to remain free while awaiting trial. Ortiz countered with the ledger. The beautiful, incriminating, incredibly stupid ledger that Chloe had kept in her jewelry box like some kind of criminal scrapbook. Your Honor, the defendant kept detailed records of her crimes, 43 separate credit card numbers, dates of use spanning 8 months, transactions in Paris, Barcelona, Miami, and multiple domestic locations. This isn't a one-time mistake. This is systematic, premeditated fraud. The defendant was arrested with first-class tickets to London, purchased with stolen funds, planning to continue this pattern internationally. She poses a significant flight risk and has demonstrated continued criminal behavior right up until her arrest. Judge Morales, older guy, probably late 60s with reading glasses that he kept adjusting while reviewing documents, listened to both sides with the expression of someone who'd heard these arguments 1,000 times. When the defense finished, when Ortiz finished, when all the legal posturing was done, he looked at Chloe directly. Ms. Hale, the evidence presented suggests a pattern of deliberate criminal activity over an extended period. You maintained records of your offenses. You used your position of trust at a luxury retail establishment to obtain personal information from customers. You made substantial purchases using stolen financial information across multiple states and were planning international travel funded by these illegal activities. The government has demonstrated both the seriousness of the charges and the risk you pose. Bail is denied. You'll remain in federal custody pending trial. The gavel came down. That sound, that sharp crack of wood on wood, felt final in a way that nothing else had. Not the arrest, not the phone call, not even finding the ledger. That gavel sound was the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had been running on way too long. Chloe's face crumpled. She turned to her lawyer, said something I couldn't hear, probably asking what this meant or how to appeal or whether there was any way out of this. There wasn't. I knew the system. I knew how this worked. Once bail is denied in federal court, you're done. You sit in custody and you wait for trial and you hope your lawyer is better at their job than the prosecutor. And if the prosecutor is Diana Ortiz, well, good luck with that. They led Chloe out through a side door, the one defendants use when they're going back to lockup instead of walking out free. She didn't look at me again. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe it hurt too much. Maybe she'd finally realized that the husband she'd been stealing from was also the husband who documented everything and handed it over to federal agents and was now sitting in court watching her bail get denied. I stayed in my seat while the courtroom cleared out. Other cases were scheduled. Other people's lives were about to get legally complicated. The system moved on. It always does. Justice is a conveyor belt. Cases come in one end, verdicts come out the other, and nobody stops to ask if the people involved are okay, because the system doesn't care if you're okay. It cares if you're guilty or innocent, and even then, it mostly just cares about processing the paperwork efficiently. Agent Reynolds found me in the hallway outside. "You good?" "Define good," I said, which was becoming my standard response to that question. "Fair enough." She had a folder under her arm, probably more case documents, more evidence that would eventually be used to ensure Chloe spent a significant portion of her life in federal prison. "The watch store owner is cooperating. We've identified 37 victims so far from the ledger, contacted most of them. A few more might come forward once the media coverage hits. This is going to be a solid case." "Great," I said flatly. "Glad my marriage imploding could contribute to your conviction rate." I'd made that joke before, but it still felt appropriate. Maybe it would always feel appropriate. Maybe years from now I'd still be making bitter jokes about how my wife went to prison and all I got was this lousy witness statement. "For what it's worth," Reynolds said, her voice softer than usual, "you did the right thing. I know that doesn't help now, but you did." I nodded, because what else was there to say? Yeah, I did the right thing. I caught the criminal. I documented the evidence. I helped build the case. And in the process, I destroyed my marriage, lost my wife, not that I wanted to keep her at this point, and became the guy whose story people would tell at dinner parties as a cautionary tale. You think your spouse might be sketchy? Let me tell you about this guy I heard about. The media caught me on the way out. Reporters with microphones and cameras asking how I felt, what I thought about the charges, whether I'd suspected anything. I gave them nothing, just walked past with my head down, got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a solid 5 minutes trying to remember how to breathe normally. My phone buzzed, a text from David Chen at the watch store. "Saw the news. I'm so sorry. Had no idea. She was using customer information. We've implemented new security protocols. If you ever want to talk." I didn't respond. What would I even say? Thanks for being the unwitting accomplice in my wife's fraud ring? Really appreciate how your employment practices enabled systematic identity theft? Yeah, that would go over well. I drove home through midday traffic, radio off, just the sound of the engine and the road and my own thoughts. The house was still quiet when I got there, still empty, still waiting for something to fill the space Chloe used to occupy. I made coffee, always coffee, the universal solution to problems that coffee definitely could not solve, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, started looking at the practical things. Divorce lawyers, asset division, how to legally separate from someone who's in federal custody. The romance was dead, but the paperwork was very much alive and apparently complicated as hell. Nothing says moving on with your life quite like Googling how to divorce someone in prison at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. The ledger had told its tale. The courtroom had rendered its judgment. Chloe would sit in federal custody, probably for months before trial, definitely for years after conviction. And I would sit here in this house, in this life, and figure out what comes next when the person you built everything with turns out to be someone you never really knew at all. Chapter 10. Sentencing and the Aftermath. The thing about federal cases is they take forever. Not movie forever, where everything wraps up in 2 hours with a dramatic courtroom revelation and someone crying on the witness stand. Real forever. The kind of forever where months pass and lawyers file motions and discovery happens, and you start to forget what your life was like before everything became depositions and court dates and emails from prosecutors asking you to clarify testimony you gave 6 weeks ago. Chloe pleaded guilty 4 months after her arrest. Not because she had some come-to-Jesus moment where she realized the error of her ways and wanted to make things right. She pleaded guilty because Diana Ortiz had built a case so airtight you could store leftovers in it. And even Chloe's public defender, who'd been replaced by a slightly more experienced public defender after the first one basically admitted he was in over his head, knew that going to trial would just make everything worse. I wasn't there for the plea hearing, didn't want to be. Reynolds called me afterwards, gave me the rundown. Chloe had stood in front of Judge Morales, answered his questions in that quiet voice people use when they're admitting to crimes that will define the rest of their life, and formally pleaded guilty to credit card fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. 3 felonies. The kind that don't go away. The kind that follow you forever, show up on background checks, make employers nervous, turn you into a cautionary tale at fraud prevention seminars. Sentencing came 2 months after that. This time I showed up. Not because I wanted to see Chloe, but because I felt like I owed it to the 43 victims whose card information she'd stolen and used. Someone should be there representing all the people whose lives she'd messed up while funding her luxury lifestyle fantasy. The courtroom was the same. Same beige walls, same uncomfortable benches, same American flag. But this time it felt heavier somehow, more final. Arraignment is just the beginning. Sentencing is the end. This was the last chapter, the closing argument,
The part where everyone finds out exactly how much justice costs in years and dollars. Chloe looked different. Prison had done that thing prison does, made her smaller somehow, like she'd been physically diminished by concrete walls and fluorescent lights and the reality of being federal inmate number whatever. She'd lost weight. Her hair was shorter, practical, none of the style perfection she used to maintain. The orange jumpsuit had become almost normal on her, which was maybe the saddest thing I'd noticed. Diana Ortiz presented the sentencing recommendation with her usual efficiency. Your Honor, the defendant engaged in systematic fraud over a period of at least 8 months, potentially longer. She exploited her position at Prestige Timepieces to obtain personal information from 43 victims. She used stolen credit card information to fund an extravagant lifestyle, including international travel, luxury accommodations, designer purchases, and high-end dining. The total amount of fraudulent charges exceeds $200,000 across all victims. $200,000. I'd known the number was high, but hearing it said out loud in federal court made it real in a way that spreadsheets never had. Chloe had stolen $200,000 from regular people, from customers who'd walked into a watch store, made legitimate purchases, and had no idea the woman behind the counter was memorizing their card details for later exploitation. Ortiz continued, "The government recommends a sentence of 7 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. Additionally, we're seeking full restitution to all victims, plus penalties and fees." The defendant showed sophistication in her crimes, kept detailed records, and continued her criminal behavior right up until arrest. She demonstrates a clear pattern of calculated fraud and showed no remorse until faced with overwhelming evidence. 7 years. 7 years in federal prison. I did the math automatically. She'd be 45 when she got out, assuming good behavior and all that. Mid-40s with a felony record and no job prospects and a lifetime of explaining to potential employers why there's a 7-year gap in her resume that coincides with her time as a federal inmate. The defense attorney tried. He talked about Chloe's lack of prior record, her cooperation after arrest, the difficult childhood she'd had, which was news to me, and I'd been married to her for 7 years, so either it was a lie or she'd never felt like sharing. He painted her as someone who'd made terrible mistakes, but deserved a chance at rehabilitation. Asked for a reduced sentence, maybe 5 years. Pleaded for mercy, in that way defense attorneys do when they know the evidence is terrible, but they have to say something.
Judge Morales listened, reviewed documents, adjusted his glasses, and then he spoke, addressing Chloe directly. Ms. Hale, you engaged in a calculated scheme to defraud dozens of victims. You abused a position of trust. You maintained detailed records of your criminal activity, suggesting both premeditation and sophistication. The harm you caused is substantial, not just financial harm, though that alone is significant, but the violation of trust, the invasion of privacy, the ongoing impact on victims who must now monitor their credit, change their accounts, live with the knowledge that their personal information was compromised. He paused, letting that sink in. However, I note your guilty plea, your lack of criminal history, and your stated remorse, though the court questions the sincerity given the extended duration of your offenses. Then came the hammer. I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims, totaling $214,000 plus court fees and penalties. During supervised release, you will be prohibited from working in any capacity that involves handling financial transactions or personal information. You will submit to regular monitoring and reporting. Any violation of these terms will result in immediate incarceration. 6 years, not 7, but close enough. 6 years of Chloe's life gone. 6 years in federal prison, which from everything I knew about the system would be medium security, probably somewhere in Texas or maybe Oklahoma. Not the dangerous kind of prison you see in movies, but not summer camp either. Just years of structured monotony, the slow grind of time served.
the reality of consequences finally catching up with choices. They led her away. She didn't look at me this time either. Maybe she'd finally accepted that whatever we had was over, that the man she'd married and the man who had helped send her to prison were the same person, and that paradox was too complicated to process while wearing handcuffs. The restitution part was almost funny in a dark way. $214,000. Chloe didn't have $214,000. She'd spent it all on the lifestyle she was trying to maintain, which meant she'd be making payments probably for the rest of her life, assuming she ever got a job that paid more than minimum wage with a felony record. The victims would get their money back eventually through the federal restitution system, but Chloe would be paying that debt until she was old and gray. I left the courthouse, and the media was there again, but this time I was ready. I made a brief statement, something about justice being served, hoping other victims could find closure. Standard stuff that wouldn't come back to haunt me. Then I got in my car and drove. Not home, but just drove. Ended up at a coffee shop across town, ordered something complicated with too many adjectives, and sat by the window watching normal people live normal lives. David Chen called me a few days later.
The watch store had been investigated thoroughly. New security protocols implemented, staff retrained. He was embarrassed, apologetic, kept saying he had no idea what Chloe had been doing. I believed him. Sometimes the criminals are just better at hiding than the honest people are at looking. He asked if I'd be willing to consult on their new security measures. I said maybe. Haven't followed up yet. Might never. Jessica called too, which was unexpected. She'd apparently had no idea what Chloe was doing. Had believed all the lies about Jessica treating her to trips and spa days. She cried on the phone, apologized for being the unwitting cover story, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, which was becoming my automatic response to that question, even when it wasn't remotely true. She offered to meet for coffee. I politely declined. Some connections are better left severed. I moved out 8 months after the sentencing. Not because I had to. The house was mine, legally speaking, part of the divorce settlement that went through while Chloe was in federal prison. But because I couldn't live there anymore. Every room had memories. Every piece of furniture had a story. The whole place felt haunted by the ghost of a marriage that had died months ago but was still decomposing in the corners. Found a smaller place across town. 1-bedroom apartment, minimal furniture, the kind of space that didn't have room for baggage, either physical or emotional. Started over from scratch. New job, too. Took a position with a cybersecurity firm that specialized in helping fraud victims protect their information. Used my story in the interview. They loved it. Nothing says qualified fraud analyst quite like caught my own wife running an identity theft ring. I kept the bait card. Well, not physically. The actual card was evidence locked away in some federal storage facility. But I kept a digital copy of all the transaction data, screenshots of every alert, the complete timeline of how I caught her. Saved it in a folder on my laptop labeled Never Again. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep and the apartment is too quiet, I open that folder and look through it. Not because I miss her, not because I regret what I did, but because I need to remember that sometimes the person closest to you is the one you should trust the least. Chloe writes me letters occasionally. They get forwarded through my lawyer because I've made it clear I don't want direct contact. She apologizes, explains, tries to make me understand why she did what she did. I don't read them anymore. Read the first few, then stopped. There's nothing she can say that would change anything. No explanation that would make $200,000 in fraud somehow acceptable. No apology that would undo the year of lies and systematic theft. The story made it into fraud prevention training programs. Not from me.
I still haven't agreed to David Chen's request, but from other sources. Federal agents use it as a teaching tool. Security firms reference it in their materials. Someone even wrote a blog post about it that went semi-viral in cybersecurity circles. The fraud analyst who caught his own wife. I'm internet famous in the most depressing way possible. My friends ask if I'll date again. Eventually, maybe. when I can think about trust without my stomach turning, when I can look at someone's smile without wondering what they're hiding, when normal relationship concerns like, do they like me, aren't immediately followed by, are they planning to steal my identity? Therapy helps. I go once a week, talk about betrayal and trust issues and how to rebuild a life after the foundation cracks. The therapist is good. She doesn't judge, just listens, and occasionally points out when I'm being too hard on myself, which is often. I sleep better now. The apartment doesn't have the same ghosts. The silence is just silence, not the oppressive weight of lies and secrets. I wake up and check my phone, and there are no fraud alerts, because the only person who was defrauding me is currently in federal prison in Fort Worth serving year 2 of 6. Final thought, the one I come back to when I'm trying to make sense of everything. Chloe thought London would change her life, thought those first-class tickets and that luxury hotel and all those stolen moments of pretend wealth would somehow transform her into the person she wanted to be. She was right about the life-changing part, just wrong about the direction. London didn't make her rich and fabulous. London, or more specifically, trying to get to London on stolen money, changed her address from a comfortable suburban house to Federal Prison Unit C Block. Same transformation, different destination. Funny how that works. I still have the bait card data, my monument to one of the dumbest, most stylish crimes I've ever tracked. Sometimes I look at it and laugh. Sometimes I look at it and feel sad. Mostly, I just look at it and remember that justice isn't always satisfying, truth isn't always healing, and sometimes doing the right thing just means you get to be the guy who sent his wife to prison and has to live with that forever. But at least I sleep at night. And in federal prison somewhere in Texas, maybe Chloe finally does too.